Hi, this is Brian Keller, Technical Evangelist for Visual Studio, and in this video I'm going to be showing you just a few of the ways in which Visual Studio 2012 is starting to bridge the gap between development and operations, or what we commonly refer to as helping to improve DevOps for an organization. And so one of the challenges that a lot of organizations face today is that when software application developers finish the code and they hand it off to operations, their job isn't done. They're probably going to hear back from operations if there's an issue that's happening over in the production environment. But the challenge is that it's oftentimes difficult to understand as an application developer exactly what's happening in that production environment. We oftentimes don't have the same sets of tools. It's almost unheard of to be able to attach a Visual Studio debugger, for example, in a production environment and see exactly what's going on in that environment so that you can quickly get a fix out to eliminate the bug. And so one of the things that we focused on with this particular release is trying to make sure that we can give developers those same tools that they're used to within the dev and test environments for troubleshooting those issues in production. So if I show you a quick demonstration of this, this is an application that I'm using, which we'll pretend this is a production application. You'll notice that most of the time it works okay, but occasionally when I click on a particular record, there's an error. Now, as an application developer, of course, I did what I was supposed to, and I wrapped this in a nice friendly error message, so we're not getting the so-called ASP.NET yellow screen of death. But at this point, I really don't have much information about what's going on in that particular application to cause the issue. So what I might do is I might call up my friends in the operations team, and I might pass them what we call IntelliTrace in production. Now, if you're familiar with IntelliTrace, you know that IntelliTrace allows you to go back historically and actually see exactly what was happening within your .NET execution. We shipped this as a new feature in 2010, and we allowed you to run it in a development and test environment, but it wasn't originally architected to run in production. Now what you can do is you can actually put all of the files that are required for IntelliTrace collection onto maybe a USB key. And you can take that USB key with you over to a production environment, and you can plug it into the production machine, and you can run the commands that I've run here. So what I did is I first imported the PowerShell commands that are required, and then I did what's called Start IntelliTrace Collection. What that does is it actually starts capturing IntelliTrace events off of my IIS application pool. When I then restarted the application and reproduced the error as I just did, that captured everything I was doing within that IntelliTrace file. And when I'm finished, I can either stop IntelliTrace collection as I've done here, or you can checkpoint, giving you a file that you can open up in Visual Studio, but still collecting information in the event that you need additional details. Now, I collected this earlier, and what this gave me was an IntelliTrace file, which I could then copy back onto the same USB key if I wanted to, and then walk that over to my Visual Studio environment and open that up in Visual Studio Ultimate. You'll notice here that I have a list of all of my threads. I have a list of all of the individual web requests that were part of that session. I even have system information that tells me what server this was run on. And then the interesting stuff would be things like these exceptions. Now, if I double click on one of these exceptions, it's actually going to take me straight to the line of code where this exception was thrown from within my application. Notice here, that's the line of code. We can even go back in time to previous builds if you're archiving source and symbols as part of your build server. I can even see exactly what the state of any of these member variables was in this particular method call. So here you can see that this is the exact object which was set to null. And if you look at the IntelliTrace events over on the right-hand side, this shows you everything that was interesting that IntelliTrace thought might be helpful as you were collecting this particular IntelliTrace file. So you can even see things like ADO.NET. We can actually show you exactly what the ADO.NET call was from your application at that point in time. You can see things like this exception was thrown and caught, and so you can drill in and understand what was the underlying root cause of those exceptions. I have seen some people use this just to understand what additional exceptions are being thrown in their application that they may not even be aware of. Maybe there's exceptions that don't impact the end user, but are causing some performance issues, or are maybe preventing a backup mechanism from working, or a logging file, or something along those lines. So those are just a few of the ways that you can quickly use IntelliTrace to diagnose issues in production. Another thing that we're working on currently with our friends in the System Center team is integration between System Center 2012 and Team Foundation Server 2012. Here what you see is System Center Operations Manager, where we're monitoring an application that's running in a production environment. Now, occasionally within System Center Operations Manager, you'll see an issue, and the operations personnel looking at that issue might need to assign that issue to an engineer who's able to look at exactly what's going on, maybe from a source code perspective, and issue a fix to go back to production. Traditionally, you would have had to go back and forth between ops and development so that development gets everything that they're expecting in order to provide a fix back to the operations team after they understand the issue. But because System Center is already monitoring the application, all that the operations personnel needs to do is right-click on that issue and assign it to engineering, and that shows up in Team Foundation Server. When a developer looks at that issue within Visual Studio, they can even see things like a stack trace that shows exactly what was happening within that application, how much RAM was available, what the system configuration was. Really anything that System Center Operations Manager knows about the application or the underlying system or systems can be passed over as part of that diagnostics. So this is something that you can look forward to being enabled between System Center 2012 and Team Foundation Server 2012 after System Center 2012 Service Pack 1 ships later this fall. So those are just a couple of the ways that we're enabling dev and operations to actually bridge that divide and come together to reduce the amount of mean time to resolution. There's one last thing that I'll talk about, which is our partners Preemptive have a solution called Preemptive Analytics, which allows you to instrument your application, and then when you ship your application, you can actually start to capture information about how your customers are using it, whether or not it's experiencing any exceptions in the wild, or you can even instrument it to the point that you can understand how your users using individual features. So those are just a few of the ways in which Visual Studio 2012 is starting to bridge the gap between development and ops, and I can assure you we have a lot more in store for you in the future in terms of trying to bring these two parts of the organization together and ultimately help you ship and maintain and run high quality software for your customers.